Good morning, I'm Bill from PanzerRearBrakes2011.wmv. I get a lot of questions on how to remove the brake drums on Panzers, so I figured I'd video it this morning, show you the steps from start to finish. And today we're using a T75 that I use as a pulling tractor. It doesn't look like much. Think of it as a rat rod in a garden tractor. We're going to remove the right rear wheel first, and we'll take it from start to finish. I've never taken the rear drums off of this tractor, so it'll be new to me as well. The brakes on this tractor have some problems. Whenever you push down on it, there's no return. Now I think because this tractor had been being used for mowing grass, that it should be in reasonable shape. It's probably just stuck inside, as normally they are. You very rarely wear out a brake or wear anything out inside. There's really nothing that can go wrong except corrosion. So you can see I've removed the wheel from the drum. I put one jack stand underneath the frame just behind the brake backing plate and left the other tire on the ground. This way when you start yanking on this, it won't pull it off the jack stand, or at least it won't have far to fall. The drum itself is held onto a tapered axle with this nut, and I have found this morning that this nut is already loose. Sometimes it's a castle nut with a cotter pin that goes through it. Just remove that. This should not be very tight. There's no lock washer, just a flat washer on it. Now, the proper way is to use a slide hammer. This particular one I have, I had to enlarge the holes to fit the lugs through the slots. I just used a die grinder. There was some flash on here. What you want to do is remove the nut, put this over, put the nuts on, or the bolts on, and then slide it out. It should come right off. Today I don't have long enough bolts, so I'm going to show you another technique. This is probably the easiest one to mess up. It's probably the quickest way of doing it. What you'll need is a pry bar, and this is probably the minimum size sledgehammer you'll need. The bigger the better. What you're going to do is back the nut off so it's level with the axle, the end of the axle. What you're going to do is you're going to hit it with the sledgehammer, and you don't want to mess up the threads. So this nut has to be even with the end of the axle. Back here, you're going to take your pry bar and gently pull back on it against the brake backing. Now the brake backing you can bend very easily, and you can crack it. So you just want to put gentle pressure on it. Okay, that was easy. Back the nut off. Once you have the nut off, remove the brake drum, keeping in mind there's a 1/4 inch key that holds it to the axle. Straight out, you'll see the key inside. Here's the axle shaft with the keyway threads. You'll see one brake shoe on the bottom. So how does it work? When you push your pedal down with your foot, a cam moves a rod, pushes the brake pad, which is always on the bottom, just a single brake pad on this one, into the drum, and it'll stop your tractor. Now, unlike a car, you don't have to worry about heat being generated because you're not going very fast. You just want to stop the wheel so that you can turn. On some of the older, well, most of the older tractors, you'll have a modified brake cylinder in this portion instead of this rod. And basically it's just a slug that goes through the existing hydraulic brake cylinder. The newer ones, this is about 1965, and they went to a much better system here. So what's wrong with it? It looks like everything's intact. There's no rodent nests in here. You can see there's a little leaking of the seal from the axle fluid. Basically on these tractors, if it's leaking, it has fluid in it. If it's not leaking, it doesn't have any fluid in it. So you want to make sure you're topped off, that you do have fluid. There's not a whole lot you can do. It's a Chrysler rear end. So it looks like there's a lot of friction in this area, probably some in the pivot point here, probably this pivot point. So we're just going to take it and free it up and see what happens. Well, we're using our PB blaster here today. We're going to lubricate the pivot points. This little tab right here actually keeps the brake from shattering back and forth. I'm going to take that and back it off a little bit. Just bend the tab so it's not dragging as much. As you can see, it still hasn't fixed it. This is the return spring that should pull that brake shoe right back. There's a pivot point back here we want to take a look at. In fact, we'll loosen this up and retighten it, make sure there's no friction in there. And I'll do that as you wait. Okay, to free this up, we're going to use our brake tool. Grab the spring. Loosen that. The pivot for the brake shoe has a 5/8 front and a 7/8 nut on the back. Now, in keeping with the whole rat rod theme, I'm not going to make this pretty. I'm just going to lubricate it, make sure it's okay, and put it back together. Now, on these brake shoes, they're normally bonded. Sometimes there's rivets. You can see some holes in here for rivets. You just want to make sure that the pad material is not separating from the base material. Sometimes you get lucky, like I did at a flea market. I found some brake linings. They come in sets. They should, with some modification, they should fit right on there. I just put some, you could put rivets through. They're pre-drilled for rivets. You could bond them with some JB Weld or other epoxy. And again, they don't get hot, so you don't have to worry about the epoxy letting go. Sometimes you do also get lucky at Napa, in this case, where you can come up with some brake shoes that are brand new, that fit right on there. I'm not going to use these again. It's for a future restoration. Over the course of the last half hour, I was able to free up the pivot point of the brakes. What I found was a hole in here, obviously for oil to get in from the top. It also lets water in from the top if you leave this outside. And it just supports the can that moves the pad up and down. What I also had to do was use an electric heat gun and put it on the bolt face. Notice this is welded. This will not come off. It's a pretty nice weld in here and in here. It's just a standoff. This is the place where the other brake shoe went previously. So this just takes a lot of moving back and forth and a lot of PB blaster, and you'll free it up. If you don't do this, the whole effort is for nothing. Sometimes there's a cover over here as well. I've seen just an insert that goes in, probably from the other side, and then it comes out, just to block that hole from mice getting into it. Once everything's freed up, you can then put the pivot point in, lubricate it, put the pivot point in for the brake shoe. Pull the anti-rattle tab up. Install the brake adjuster. And then put your spring between the 2 points. Now here's your tractor pulling tip of the day. Don't let this brake shoe rest against the drum. In other words, don't get this too tight. If you get that too tight, it'll drag. Any drag takes horsepower away. It can actually cause your tractor to pull to the right or to the left during the pull, and you won't know why. Spring goes on with the spring tool. And you can see that works pretty well. Okay, if you're interested in getting the axles out of the rear end, first you have to take the brake backing plate off. There's 4 bolts, and you don't have to take the pad off. This whole backing plate comes off together. There's probably some spacers between the backing plate and the axle that spaces everything out and lets the axle move freely here. What I did was I made a slide hammer, and out of a piece of 1/2-inch all-thread rod, I welded a nut that's the same as the end of the axle to another nut that fit the 1/2-inch all-thread. And what you do is you just put it on the end of the threads, and then you can back that right out. There's no C-clip or anything. You have to do this first, though, in order to get the rear end apart. So axles come out of both sides, then the third member comes out. Once you install the brake drum, put the axle nut on, just crank it down. If you have a castle nut, you'll crank it down. Unlike setting a wheel bearing on the front of a vehicle, you don't have to set it and back it out. You just need to get it kind of tight. You can hold the brake for this. Actually, that's about as tight as it needs to be. So now that the brakes are free to move, you want to make sure that they still work. Because it's a pulling tractor, I'm not going to adjust them any more than they are now. I know that they function. I don't want them to drag. And we'll try them out. We're going to move to the next side and get that freed up. As a follow-up, this is the other side of the T75. I wanted to show you this clip right here. This is what covers the hole in the brake adjuster. It's frozen just like the other one, same condition. This tapered axle shaft was rusted. The keyway was rusted on it, so it was a little harder to get off, but I used the same technique. If you have to, you could use some heat from a brazing torch. Don't use a cutting torch to get that off. Some penetrating oil probably will not get in between these two surfaces, so the PB Blaster would not be usable in this case. PB Blaster can get in the keyway though, so if that is rusted pretty bad, you can get that out. Okay, we've gotten the left side brakes to work. I had problems getting this drum on and off, and the problem with that was the brake was adjusted so that it was too tight, so it didn't take too much travel to get it on, so it was hanging up on the drum as I was taking it on and off. So I just backed it off. It still works. So that's how you do it. If you have any questions, info@PanzerTractors.com. I'm Bill for PanzerTractors.com. Thanks for watching.